you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for your testimony. Human rights have been systematically violated by the Iranian regime, and there seems to be no sign that the situation is improving. I know we touched on this, but I want you to elaborate, if you can, for the entire panel. Women, ethnic, religious minorities such as Kurds, Baha'i, Christians, and Jews, political protesters, journalists, human rights lawyers, and others have been repressed and persecuted. In 2010, the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions Accountability and Divestment Act included a provision that for the first time imposed sanctions against Iranian officials responsible for the country's human rights abuses. This provision has been used at least 15, in at least 15 cases, to my knowledge, targeting many of those who perpetrated human rights violations against the Green Movement. Additionally, in July 2011, the U.S. and Britain imposed visa restrictions on more than 50 Iranian officials for their roles in political repression in Iran. Can you speak to the effectiveness of these targeted sanctions? I know you touched upon it, but if you can elaborate, I'd appreciate it very much. Have we seen a change in Iran's approach to human rights due to this? And I probably know the answer, but I want to hear from you. Can we tailor this newest round of sanctions to more effectively pressure Iran to comply with the human rights obligations? For the entire panel, please.
Obviously, I'm sure it's probably the consensus of this group. I don't want to testify for my colleagues, but Iran's human rights situation is deplorable, and it is not improved. And if anything, Iran, when the Persian Spring, if you will, was the first of what you saw in the Middle East, started in 2009, and then what's happened around the Arab world, Iran has shown that it is willing to be more brutal and more repressive against its own people in order to retain its power than really almost any other government, perhaps Syria. But you have a very restive minority population, 42% minority there. So it is a tenuous hold, particularly as this economic pressure has been put in place. We ran a campaign, United Against Nuclear Iran. We ran a campaign on human rights abuses where we highlighted international crane manufacturers. One of the great methods of horrible repression is Iran would stage gruesome public executions of hanging dissidents, homosexuals from cranes in public squares, and these were international crane manufacturers. And we've succeeded in using those human rights violations, abuses, to highlight what we think are some economic measures that we can take in order to continue to isolate that regime for those very same human rights abuses.
I would just say quickly that I do think human rights sanctions work. I don't think the Iranian regime is like the North Korean regime. I think many top-level Iranian officials like to travel to Europe. They like to ski in Stad. They like to shop at Harrods in London. I think the difficulty has been that we've slapped on travel bans and asset freezes, and then we relax them when these same Iranian officials become the foreign minister or the defense minister and travel to a IAEA meeting in Vienna or a OPEC meeting or a UN meeting. So those travel bans are great in theory, but in practice they're not being enforced. I think the human rights sanctions are important, but I would argue that we need to go that next step. We need to sanction Ali Khamenei. He's the greatest human rights abuser in Iran. It doesn't mean we still can't negotiate with this regime, but let's send a message to the Iranian people that we agree with 75% of them that Ali Khamenei is a torturer and a murderer and should be called to account by the United States of America.
This is a point that requires no reinforcement, but I think it should be reinforced anyways. The human rights situation in Iran is abysmal. You mentioned ethnic minorities, women. I think it's Iranian citizens of whatever their gender and ethnicity are being subject to harassment, repression, arbitrary judicial tribunals, show trials, just the entire spectrum of issues where Iran is emerged as one of the most repressive states in the Middle East, and that's saying something, given the lofty standards of that particular region. I think one of the limitations of our dialogue with Iran, and it's a limitation of the 5-1+ process, is that it focuses on proliferation and proliferation transgressions. So the issue of human rights never gets aired at those particular meetings. I'm not quite sure if we can successfully, if we should exclude it I think we should bring it up to the Iranian officials anytime we have encounters with them, that the international community is concerned not just because of their violations of their international obligations under the NPT, but also their international obligations in a variety of human rights standards. Iran is a signatory to various UN human rights documents, international human rights documents. It is a violation of Iran's international obligation to behave domestically in the way it has, and that's something that should be highlighted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Griffin is recognized.